Hello. I'm Forrest and I've got a problem. What up, problem heads? P heads? How's it going? Another day. Look at this, everybody. If you're watching, I do not have any more glare. I bought new readers. They're not as cool as my other readers. These ones right here, they have the cool colors, but you see the reflection in those? No reflection in these. Oh, there's very little reflection. I did not know that until I just started recording today. And the only reason I bought these is because I'm losing my eyesight. I had to go up. I couldn't read anymore with the other glasses, but I just kept using them. Like, oh, I guess I can kind of. And then I put on another, I think it's like plus 200 now, or I went up to whatever, and I was like, oh shit, I can read again. So I'm just going to have to keep doing this until I just go legally blind. But it's just reading. But it's exciting. There's no glare. They're kind of, I guess they're a little bit stylish. I don't know. They look like they're shitty glasses that have a camera in them. Nobody's watching this, only a few of you. So, but I'm very happy about it because I had to read a lot of questions today with our guests. I couldn't just wing it and just, thanks for everybody subscribing to the podcast. Please tell other people to listen to this podcast. Rate, comment on all platforms, YouTube, Apple, Spotify. And if you feel like donating to the podcast, thank you to everybody that's donated money. This microphone, this is the third podcast that I think is so much better. That's been awesome. Forshaw.net. There is a little donate button above where the podcast sections are. And come out and see me. I'm going to be all over the place. I'm going to be in Montreal, Canada at the Comedy Nest in a little bit. I'm going to be there 2 weeks after one of the largest comedy festivals in the world, JFL in Montreal. Is that a good time to go to a place when the entire city is comedy fatigued? Probably not, but I will be there. So if you're in Montreal, August 6th to the 9th, I should probably have my dates up. That'd probably be a very smart thing to do. But then right after that, I'm going to be in Escondido. Escondido is right near San Diego. And I'm going to be there with my buddy JJ Whitehead. We're doing shows at the Grand Comedy Club, August 15th to the 16th. They just moved to a new location. It's supposed to be awesome. I can't wait to do that. So I have 2 shows on the 15th and the 16th. And the Comedy Nest, by the way, is August 7th through 9th. And then I'm going to Florida, August 19th. I'll be at the Shamrock Comedy Club in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. August 20th, Orlando Funny Bone in Orlando. August 21st to the 23rd in Tampa at Side Splitters, one of my favorite clubs in the world. And then I'll be at the Comedy Cellar in Vegas. I'll be in Boise, Idaho at the Lounge at the End of the Universe. The Comedy Lounge. It's just called the Comedy Lounge. Yeah. Thought it was a lounge at the end of the universe. I guess they changed it. It's a Comedy Lounge in Boise. And then I'll be at McCurdy's in Sarasota, the Comedy Inn in Miami, Snappers in Fort Myers, Sad Band Comedy Club, Comedy Key West, yada, 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 yada. So come out and see me at one of those places. And then the Australia, I don't think I ever mentioned that. I am definitely coming to Australia next year. I'm coming for festivals. I'm coming to Perth. That would be part of the Perth Fringe Festival. This is starting in mid-February. And then I'm going to the Adelaide Fringe Festival. And then I'm going to Sydney and Melbourne and I think Newcastle. I don't know why I said it like that. But go to my website and check it out. If you want to call in the podcast, I haven't even checked the phone numbers in a while. I'm going to check them and we'll do that next podcast. 305-563-7264, 305 Joe Rang. Ask me some questions. I like that episode where I did by myself, where I just answer questions. Email me questions on my website if you feel like doing that, or you can call the number 305-563-7264 +1. And now it is time for everybody's favorite sub-segment and the only segment of the show, other than the main segment. I've got another problem. I've got another problem. Littering. Yeah, that seems like an obvious one, but I don't know. It was just bothering me the other day because I just saw someone throw a bag of trash out of their car in the car in front of me. And who the fuck is doing that? Like, what is your mindset that you have trash in your car and you're just like, I guess I'll just throw it out the window here. Right? That's cool, right? I don't like having trash in my car, whether it's like empty bottles or food or whatever. I'm the first one that tells you I want it out of my car, but I've never thrown anything out of a window. And then it just goes into a gutter and it gets down into the storm drains, and that gets flushed out to the ocean. And then a turtle chokes on your fucking dumb wrapper. Or doesn't even have to be a turtle. What if it's just an ugly fish that chokes on your fucking trash? If you litter, just stop listening to this podcast. Hot take. Listen up. Nah, I don't, who the fuck, like, I don't understand. But also, we have too much packaging. That's just a whole nother thing, by the way, too. I think about this a lot. Like sometimes where, I think there's a documentary on now called The Tylenol Murders, and I haven't watched it yet, but back when I was younger, I remember there was a whole rash of people that were, the Tylenol was, I think it was cyanide or something, that there was like 7 or 8 bottles that were laced with it. So people died. So they had all these recalls like that. They would call all the Tylenol medicine. And I think from that point forward, I haven't even watched the documentary, but I bet you this is what it's about. That they had to redo packaging when they put a seal on it. Then they'll put a seal under the lid, and then they put like another wrapper on top of that. And then now you have to go like through 5 things to get to the, used to be able to just open up, well, milk and just take a swig of it in the store and put it back. And someone would buy it and they'd be like, this tastes weird. It tastes garlicky. Because, someone else's mustache got in the milk, and we were fine. Let's go back to that. But yeah, there's just too much packaging. And I think that leads to a lot of littering. But if you litter, you're just a fuckhead. And I remember when I went to Yellowstone a couple years back, I was doing a gig with Orlando Leyva. We were working at this, was with the Foo Fighters and Lord Huron. We did comedy at like an auction in a tent for all these wealthy people. But I didn't describe that well enough, but it doesn't matter. I was at Yellowstone, and I was driving by someone that was in a minivan, and I just happened to time it where I was driving by that they were throwing a bag into the shrubs, like on the side of the road. I am telling you, we were 75 feet from the sign that says, "Welcome to Yellowstone National Park." So I stopped. I turned around. By the time I turned around, they were pulling off. I pulled over, and I could see it was a bag of dirty diapers. Like they just changed diapers and thrown them into the fucking grass. So I took the bag, I threw it in the trunk of my car. I'm a psychopath. And I went like 80, 90 miles an hour after him until I caught up with them. And then I just followed them. And now I can smell the bag in the trunk. I'm like, yeah, there's a reason they threw this into the grass. But I don't fucking own a kid. I don't have a kid. So it's not my responsibility. And I just waited until they finally pulled over, and I threw the bag and drove off. That taught him a lesson. Don't be a dick. All right, we have a great episode today. A non-addict. I asked him. He's not an addict, but he is a historian and author of a book about sports gambling, and it's a great book called Losing Big, America's Reckless Bet on Sports Gambling. And by the way, if you're not a gambler, it's still a really interesting read historically about the rise of sports gambling in this country, but through professional sports. And we talk about other countries and betting as well and stuff. So I hope you enjoy this. I actually read a book for this. And I really want to thank Jonathan for being on the podcast, and I'll see you on the other side. Please welcome my guest today, Jonathan D. Cohen. He is a historian and the author of Losing Big, America's Reckless Bet on Sports Gambling. People can find more info about his book or contact him through his website, jonathndcohen.com. Thanks for being here, Jonathan.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. I said I wasn't going to ask this, but I'm still going to ask it. What's your problem?
Yeah, well, my real problem is that one of my kids wakes up at like 5:30 every morning and has for all 3 years of his life. That's like probably the number one most pressing problem that I'm dealing with.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe not as sympathetic for some of the problems that people bring up on the podcast, or not as relatable.
Everything's relatable. That's I mean, I have comics on, so people,
right?
Yeah.
Then I would say, I mean, I I'm not a big drinker, not a big smoker, not a big even gambler, which I guess is ironic. I would say I'm a professional board game player, and I definitely have felt at times sort of the loss chasing phenomenon that is also defines gamblers, where you lose and you're like, oh shoot, I really want to get it back. And you're not you're not supposed to play that way. Like you should be playing because you want to play. And I think when you're chasing your losses, it's something else, and it's not because you want to play and you've lost your enjoyment for it. So that, to the degree that I've experienced sort of the problem, or sort of what I've come to understand is the kinds of problems defining someone with a gambling addiction. That's where I've found it in the niche world of board games.
Settlers of Catan is causing
Settlers of
addiction.
Catan is like it's like that's like the more accessible, sort of popular. Of course, I need to be indie and niche and annoying and have games that are less popular than Settlers of Catan. Yes.
Yeah. So this is a great book. As a compulsive gambler myself, I know you talk about gambling disorder, but all in the same realm. I identified with a lot of the stories that I'm assuming you changed the names of these people, or these are maybe just a bunch of stories put together of Andrew and I think the other guy's name's Harry. And did I have that right?
Yeah. So I guess there's three really. Harry is a former or someone with a gambling addiction, but he's now an advocate. I sort of profile him more as an advocate than as someone with an addiction or overcame addiction. There's this guy Andrew whose story I do a real deep dive on. Like, he gave me his bank records. I talked to his best friend from high school. I talked to his parents. I talked to everybody. And then there's this other guy, Kyle, who's sort of the protagonist of the book, who let me use his real name, by the way, as did Harry. And Kyle, whatever, it's not quite as severe of an addiction as Andrew, but he is sort of the through line of the book of someone who, you didn't even get, this wasn't even your question, but I'll just say it. He was someone who was not gambling before it became legal and it became online, accessible online. And I think he's a defining character in that way, and sort of emblematic of the problems and the people who are experiencing problems these days.
All right, so let's just talk about. You go into a little bit of the history of gambling, which I've never really, what I really liked about this book from my standpoint, that I've never really academically looked at gambling, like just origins, and never even occurred to me that there wasn't point spreads before. Like, it was just people betting on games winning or losing. And then, I know it's very brief at the beginning, but you kind of talk about the people storming the field that were they wanted to try and get, I think there was like a storm coming in or something like that, and they wanted to.
This is Fenway Park, and I think it's like 1915. It's all these bettors have bet on the Red Sox to win, and the Red Sox are losing, and all these bettors storm the field because they think that it's about to rain, and if they can delay the game long enough to get a rain delay and the game called off, their bets will be voided and they won't lose. And this is like just this weird little chapter in baseball history defined by gambling, other than the Black Sox scandal, which I think everybody knows about from 1919, that just shows, to your point, how old this thing is, how much of a part of sports it's been, not just in the United States, but basically forever.
Yeah, and I make it clear on this podcast, I don't think other people. I should not gamble. I shouldn't bet on sports. I shouldn't be in a casino betting, and I work in casinos, but I should, be gambling. But I don't mind if other people do. Just the same way I don't have a problem drinking, and have a drink once in a while. But it does seem like, and it's always seemed this way to me, that sports were made to, sports came out before gambling, obviously, but gambling has enhanced sports, I think the right, or made it so that more people are attracted to watching them, I think. And
yeah. I mean, I think I would maybe that's the case when it comes to professional sports, but I would say sort of in the pre-modern era, the sort of professional sports era, I see lots of evidence that gambling really did grow up with sports, and that gambling has been a part of sort of humans' love of sport from the beginning. If you think about sort of the defining sports before sort of the modern professional baseball of the 19th century, for example, if you think about something like horse racing, right, which has always just been inextricably mixed and defined by gambling. I'm talking about like ancient Native American dart games, like going back thousands of years, that like probably had some gambling elements in them. So I think, to your point, and this is why I don't come out and say, oh, we need to get rid of gambling. Gambling is illegal. Gambling should be illegal. Gambling is bad, blah, blah, blah. Because I do think there's an element of it that's inextricable, that is sort of inevitable, that is like built into people's impulse and what they want to do. The question is, have we made it sort of too easy, or have we allowed sports to be like sort of taken over by it, which would be a new phenomenon that Native Americans of 5,000 years ago probably wouldn't recognize.
Yeah, horse racing for sure. I mean, I don't know. Maybe you like horse racing. Anytime I've watched horse racing, I'm like, this is like if people were not gambling on this, I don't think anyone would care at all. You know, I know people dress up for the Kentucky Derby and this whole event and stuff, but I couldn't care less about horse racing at
I
all.
totally agree.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel this way about golf too, which is like a little bit more of a hot take, but I think golf is like just so dumb and terrible for the environment and all these other things. But yes, the less I can learn about horse racing while still being good enough in my job to talk about gambling policy, the better. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I know that's not. I don't know if that's not that a lot of people say about golf, but at least with golf, there's like I don't know if what is the skill the horse is doing on because I remember they had
Right.
like 50 greatest athletes in Sports Illustrated, however many years ago. Sports Illustrated doesn't exist anymore. But I think Secretariat was like number what I'm like, come on. Like this, then we might
It's a
as well make
horse.
all 50 of them horses then because they're all better
Yeah.
athletes. Yeah.
Yeah. And so to your point, there is sort of an actual history of, gambling and horse racing. I sort of treat it as beyond as sort of separate. And, clearly the people who we're talking about, a modern day gambling addict or whatever, who's betting on FanDuel is probably not, other than the Kentucky Derby, pulling up horse racing. They're looking at NBA, NFL, MLB, sort of these modern games that were modernized, thanks in part to the rise of gambling 100 years ago.
Yeah. And greyhound racing. So the
Another one I couldn't care less
yeah,
about. Yes.
yeah, I don't just yeah. Um the parlay. So this was interesting. The invention, and I don't even know how to define I know what a parlay is. I put in many parlay bets. I just tell people it's like when you bet on multiple games and they all have to come in and you have to win them, or else the bet doesn't win. And the payouts are huge, but it's very difficult to win even a 2-team parlay, let alone 10 or 12 or 15 that these people put in. So that was invented how like or that the origin of that was from I forget what it was. It's called.
Oh, interesting. I actually don't know the history. I know that there's an equivalent in the UK. They call it an accumulator, which sounds like what like the Harry Potter world, what they would call a vacuum in the Harry Potter universe. It's effectively a parlay, but parlays have changed as you can imagine. So, sorry, just to be clear. So, parlay is exactly what you said, a bet on multiple different things within a game. If anyone's seen Uncut Gems and he bets on like the team to win the tip off and then a team to win the half and then another team to win the game, that's like sort of a parlay. You need all the legs of it to hit. And they've just become really popular for exactly the reason that you outlined of low investment, high payout, sort of a transformation of sports betting into basically a lottery or a lottery ticket.
Oh, that was the name of it, Sports Lottery. It was in your book. That's what I was saying. Sports
Oh,
Lottery.
yeah.
Yeah.
So those are more. Yeah. So okay. So those are something called parlay cards, which actually don't have anything to do with what we now know as Well, they sort of do. So those are sort of like a picks pool, effectively, where you, depending on the organization, not the picks pool that I ran at my Jewish high school in 2007. We were not as sophisticated with our methodology, but yes, you're right. That would be a those parlay cards were based on usually money line or point spread parlays where you had to pick just the winners of games, right? It wasn't about individual player performances across many different games. It was like you would I think 14, 15 NFL games every Sunday. You can pick between 3 and 14 games to try to parlay together the winners of all of them. And obviously the more games you can parlay together successfully, the higher the payout. And this is just for background, this is what states were threatening to legalize through their lottery commissions in the late 1980s and 1990s. They were going to sort of add this, like you could buy a lottery ticket, you could buy a parlay card at your convenience store. And Oregon added this in 1989. And this is what inspired the federal backlash to sports betting that was undone in 2018 by the Supreme Court, which is how we got to modern sports betting today, was the Supreme Court overdoing this 1992 law that clamped down on parlay cards of all things. And that's how we got here.
Yeah, because I remember growing up. I'm 52, so I was born in 72. So my gambling career, for lack of a better word, started in college, in the early 90s, right? Is that right? Yeah. And I just remember you couldn't gamble on sports legally, unless you had a bookie, you call up. And the and unless you were in Vegas, and then it just started to become legal. Like certain states would have it. Then the rise of I just remember it like this. I don't remember this legislation. I don't remember reading about it, and then I just remember it starting to happen.
Yeah. So this was 2018. This is all precipitated by this 2018 Supreme Court decision that again overturned this 1992 law. And so starting 7 years ago is when states really opened, and starting with Delaware, and they were offering legal chances to bet on sports. And then as of 18 months or so after the decision, the legal opportunities to bet on sports, not just at a casino, but online on your phone.
Yeah. And live betting and all that. Yeah. So
Right.
that's because I had been to, I went to Australia for my first time. I go there pretty often now, but I want to say 2014. And they had that. I remember that being like a cautionary tale of just saying, hey, in every bar you go to in Australia, gambling is massive in Australia. I don't
Yeah.
know if,
Yeah.
not every bar, but most bars have a back room with slot machines. They call them pokies, adorable. And then they have also the screens that you see at every casino now where you go up and literally they'll have all the games on. They'll have stuff from around the world and you can just live bet on things that are going on. And I remember that was like a cautionary tale of like, well, this is coming to America, like probably at some point I was like, I don't know about that. We're pretty strict about it. And then now it's just full blown. It's, I, I think I mean, I know there was laws that were passed, but it just feels very unregulated in the way. And I've talked about this many times with the ads. Like there's ads during NFL and NBA games for gambling, which I know that there's other ads for quote unquote vices or addictions, things like that, but like beer and stuff. But you're not allowed to drink beer in the ads, but they're allowed to show Jamie Foxx gambling, like when he's on, I think he's MGM. The ESPN might as well just be a gambling station. Like they have their own betting app and they have sections. I mean, every panel beforehand is like, hey, here's our cold lead pipe locks of the get whatever they're called, whatever the segment's called. And so I said at the beginning, like I think people should be able to legally gamble. I think I'm fine with that. Most of my friends don't have any issues with it, and it's fine. But I also think there should be some maybe safeguards or something set up for I don't know, just for people that are not gambling properly.
Yeah. So this is what's tough because it was legalized by states. And of course it is regulated. It's not like completely unregulated. You can like let a 15-year-old sign up. You know what I mean? But it sure seems like the regulations maybe don't go far enough or are sort of focused on letting people sign up and sort of basic money laundering protection, which is sort of a big deal when it comes to gambling regulation. That's it. Like that's sort of it. Like we don't have what other countries have, and Australia, just because you brought it up, is considering, things like banning advertisements during sports games for the exact reason that you mentioned of exposing children and triggering someone with an addiction and so on. And we didn't do any of that. We sort of did a classic American thing of like opening this up, letting the market just have its way and letting sort of companies do whatever they want. And then as we can talk about, oh, lo and behold, there are all these problems sort of popping up and maybe we're gonna have to go in and clean them up afterwards. And that's been the strategy so far. And that's the word that I use in the subtitle of the book, sort of very purposely, is reckless. Not because I think gambling itself is bad or is necessarily reckless, but the way we rolled it out in the United States over the last 7 years is reckless and is unnecessarily causing harm and getting people caught up in addiction and so on. And it didn't have to be this way. We could have rolled it out, as you're referring to, more carefully, learning from other countries, adding regulations in from the start rather than just going hog wild and then, oh shoot, oh look at all these problems, we have to go and clean them up now.
Yeah, I always think it's funny. I work in a lot of casinos, and so I'm in Vegas a lot, among other places too. And they always have money. Like if you're going to get money out from the ATM, they'll have signs, but hey, do you have a problem gambling? But it's on the ATM. It's like no one's walking up to the ATM about to pull another $1,000 out. I'm like, man, thank God the sign was here. I really,
Right.
thanks, Caesars.
Okay,
Yeah,
but you're totally right, and I don't want to like present an overly rosy or nostalgic view for physical gambling and for Vegas gambling, because there are all sorts of predatory practices that are sort of well documented about, you know, they pump oxygen in, they're free drinks, there's no windows, there's no clocks, like all sorts of, like, so much of casino revenue is from people with addictions. I don't want to sort of romanticize that version and that history of gambling at all, but it's so different. It's fundamentally different in that at a casino, just to take the example that you just offered, you need to like physically be there, awake, putting like chips on the table, getting money from an ATM, giving it to a person, walking up to the counter, selecting the sports bet that you want to put, like spinning, they're putting a chip on the table and spinning the dealer can spin the roulette wheel. You have to pull the slot machine lever. That there, again, not to say that it's perfect and doesn't prey on people, but there's some friction involved, that like some natural checks that would slow people down. And again, not everyone gets slowed down and so on. But these days, as there's not that, these days it's just like 19-year-olds sitting at home betting, you know, their parents' mortgage on like whether the next pitch is going to be 88 miles an hour, or on Malaysian women's doubles badminton, which is like legal to bet on some apps, on some states. And so the natural friction that existed in gambling before online legalization is just gone. And that to me is, if we want to talk about the sort of the regulations that we need to add back, that's where I would start, is restoring some of that natural friction to slow the process down.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I agree with that totally. And the Malaysian badminton thing is such a, there's
You're
so
a
many
huge
things.
fan. You're a huge Malaysian women's
Look,
doubles badminton guy.
if there have been times when I wake up, I've lost a lot of money at night. I go to bed, I wake up, I feel like shit. I mean, I can only say it's akin to what it'd be like if you're coming down off being, you know, drunk or high or whatever. There's a similar, you know, thing going on with your dopamine stuff. And so you want to get back in the action, and games don't start. I mean, minimally, if it's baseball season, there might be a day game at like noon or 1, but it's 7 in the morning. You go on an app and you're like, oh yeah, I know nothing about the soccer league in Amsterdam, but I mean in Holland or, but I'm just going to put some, I've done that before. I put wagers on soccer. I don't know anything. I don't watch soccer. I don't mind it, but I don't know anything about the Spanish La Liga, you know? I mean, other than,
Oh, it gets way more. I mean, I talked to Kyle, who I mentioned, he was betting on minor league British darts at 3 a.m. And he described it as like, he basically would have bet on a coin flip, and he effectively felt like he was doing that. He just like, there's two guys' names. Sure, I'll pick James, John, like whoever, like, I don't know, some random British guy, because I just need something to bet on, something to keep the dopamine cycle going. And, you know, as you well know, someone who's addicted to gambling is addicted to that sort of interstitial moment of like, while they've made a bet and they're waiting for the bet to be decided. So the more pieces of action, the more ways you can provide action to them, that's just going to sort of keep them on the app, keep them addicted, and keep them gambling.
yeah, and you can't watch, I'm sure you can't watch minor league British darts. You can't, just like you can't watch, so you're just watching.
Oh, I have it open right now, actually, and my other tab. Yeah.
Oh, really? That and that in the open, right? You love golf.
Yeah, right. But to your point about timing, like two of the gamblers I profiled, both of them ended up basically becoming huge tennis bettors for exactly that reason. Is there's always, all time of year there's tennis happening. It might be happening at 6 a.m. in Kazakhstan or whatever, but you can bet on it.
I was literally going to say like, when you were talking about the darts, I was thinking about all the times I've bet on tennis. I've bet on, because they have different bets. One of them is the total number of games won by players. So it's like there'll be two players and be like, well, this player win this many under or over games, you know? So you have to figure out if they're good and they're going to win the 3 set, or if it's a men's or a women's match. And so there was one of like, I mean, I've had many sad moments of gambling, so I shouldn't say one of the most sad, but I had bet through an app. I don't know, it was probably like 4 years ago, and it was on tennis, and it was a total number of sets or games, and then they went to tiebreaker, and apparently they don't count that. So I thought I had won based on it was, and then my account wasn't getting updated. So I called up, I waited for like 25 minutes to talk to a person. And then finally they had to explain to me, they had to do some research and explain to me that these weren't like, it's just, plus
Right. And
I
you're
didn't even
gambling on
watch
something
the
you don't,
game.
right.
Yeah.
You don't even understand what you're gambling on, and it doesn't
Yeah.
matter. Like, you would gamble on a coin flip at that point if you could. It's just really, it is about the dopamine. It is about the
Yeah.
action. It's not because you're a huge fan of the Kazakhstani tennis league or whatever.
This was I think it was the ATP, whatever the name for it.
Yeah. Give yourself a little credit. Give yourself a little credit. Okay, fine. Yeah.
I mean, there were I think what's his name? Nadal was in it, maybe. I don't remember, but it was definitely another person I didn't know, and it was probably in Kazakhstan, the tournament. But
Right.
so yeah, the apps, the rise of the apps. When I don't remember, and I know you detail in the book, was it DraftKings and FanDuel? Were they the first app? Were they, I guess, were the first major ones, or?
Yeah. So they were certainly ready. I mean, so just a little bit of background, right? They were, DraftKings and FanDuel specifically got their start not as sports gambling companies, but as daily fantasy sports companies, which you may remember in about a decade ago. That was sort of the precursor to the
That was a
legalization of.
loophole, right? That they got in.
Yeah, exactly. It was effectively gambling, but just justified legally as fantasy sports, and they were able to sort of basically offer effectively gambling through this loophole. And then so they were ready out of the gate come the 2018 Supreme Court decision with apps for exactly that reason. Many of these other companies, Caesars, BetMGM, Fanatics, either right away or shortly after, were sort of also ready with their own apps. But FanDuel and DraftKings, no one knew it at the time. Very few people would have predicted what we have now, which is basically these two companies that dominate the entire arena. But because they were sort of mobile first, everyone was sort of expecting it was going to be like Caesars and MGM, like sort of the big names, because they have big casino properties. I think people didn't really reckon or didn't realize how quickly online was going to take over, what percentage of all the bets were going to be made online. And as a result, that these two little companies that no one had heard of 10 years before were so well positioned because they were always mobile first, and rather than retail first like Caesars or MGM.
Yeah, and so the daily fantasy sports, I guess, I think people know what fantasy sports are, but daily fantasy, if people don't know, is you can make a lineup for just that day. Like you can pick players just for that day to bet. It's not like a season long thing like you do with fantasy football or baseball. But but they didn't have the prop bets yet. That was just kind of, or did, or that, what was the
Right.
loophole?
No.
They basically said,
Yeah.
this isn't gambling. Like,
right. So it wasn't gambling because the version that we had of daily fantasy 10 years ago was peer-to-peer. So you'd enter a contest against like 1,000 other people or whatever, and whoever can construct the best lineup of NFL players that day would win. In some cases, they had like $1 million jackpots, like literally. Or you could challenge your friends, like, hey, or some stranger, like, hey, Forrest, like, let's each take $100 of fake salary money. We'll build our lineup, and whoever's players perform the best wins. So that was the loophole that it worked through at the time, was you're playing against other people rather than against the house. Side note, what we have now in states like California that haven't legalized sports betting yet. Well, California is not a good example, but say someone like Georgia that have not legalized sports gambling yet, they do have daily fantasy sports, and they do have it now against the house. So it's even more similar to actual sports gambling than it was when they existed on this loophole 10 years ago. But that's how these companies were able to basically do all the cultural clearing work. And the reason that there wasn't sort of a bigger backlash to the Supreme Court decision was, I think, people were sort of ready and primed to gamble and to see gambling as part of their sports experience based off of the years of dominance of daily fantasy sports.
yeah. And there's so many, I guess, depending on what state and what the rules are, there's different apps that can kind of get their,
right.
Because I mean, there's FanDuel and DraftKings are the two big ones. And I know there's all these partnerships with all the different professional sports leagues now. But it feels like there's a new one every couple weeks or month. Like there was one called something Monkey. I remember that one.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Uh,
So the
Prize
industry has,
Kings or
right. No, the
Prize
industry has
Picks, right?
changed a lot. Yeah, the industry has changed. Back in 2018, or maybe let's say around 2020, right, really 2022, as the industry's really taken off, there were a huge number of companies and lots of people sort of trying to get their foot in the door, but all basically doing the same thing. And FanDuel and DraftKings were just able to snowball their name recognition and their market dominance into sort of more name recognition and more market dominance, such that they now have like 80% or so, I think, of total market share nationwide. So we can talk about the industry, but effectively, we're really just talking about two companies, one based in Boston, one owned by a Irish company.
Yeah, I mean, there's Coca-Cola and Pepsi, but there's still like Czech Cola and all these, there's
Right,
all these other
right.
ones that will take your real money and like, you know, so the and the sports gambling, have we seen like an increase in it with the rise of the apps? Or is that
Yeah. So this is a key point. I mean, it seems obvious, but the answer is yes. And it was not always obvious. The argument at the time for legalization was, oh, all these people are already gambling illegally. Let's legalize gambling, not so that we can increase the number of people gambling, but we can bring them all onto the apps and legally. They can bet safely. They'll generate tax revenue. That was the argument made at the time to justify this.
Mm. Yeah, that's flawed argument, but sure.
yeah, you can guess how that went. And so what we have now is, first of all, lots of people didn't convert from the apps. Didn't convert from the black market for all sorts of reasons that I'm happy to talk about. But what you have now is 70% of people living on college campuses are active sports bettors. 50% of men between the ages of 18 through 49 have at least one sports betting app on their phone. You've rapidly and massively increased the market share and the market size in terms of number of people who were never exposed to betting, who never in their wildest dreams would have like gone through this crazy process of finding a bookie or betting through a offshore illegal casino based in the Caribbean, which were sort of your options before 2018. And what you have now is a huge percentage of people, many of them young people, who again were not gambling on sports before in any real way, and now are, whether they're getting addicted or not is another story, but they are now sort of sports bettors and they define themselves, or that is part of their life, when it wouldn't have been otherwise.
Yeah, well, I think they're hoping that I'm not saying that they're sitting on board. I don't know what they're doing in their programs. They're not saying we need more addicts, but they certainly want like consistent users, and so they do the thing where like, hey, if you sign up now with this code, $500, and I mean, even if you've never gambled before and you see a commercial, it's like $500 for free. It's like, sure,
right.
I'll try that.
So they say all the right things. They not only say that they don't want more addicts, they don't say that privately. They say that publicly. They say publicly, we don't want addicts. We don't want to encourage addiction, inculcate addiction or anything. But then the behavior of the industry sort of suggests otherwise. From people I've talked to and from other sort of reporting, there's lots of people who display at times obvious signs of addiction that don't get flagged, that don't get cut off. It's the threshold is really, really high. The threshold for getting cut off by one of these companies, I guess there are two. One is if you start winning a lot of money. If they think you're actually good at sports betting, they'll cut you off. Yeah. Okay, fine, that's annoying. But the other threshold, the only way to get cut off for genuine, legitimate concern for mental health and well-being is if you say something to a customer support representative or to an employee that's explicitly like, hey, can you spot me some cash until my next paycheck? Hey, I think I might be addicted to gambling, and so on. Barring some sort of self-reporting, if you just shut up, if you don't speak English and you're on the app, and you know what I mean, they're never going to stop you, and they're never going to catch you, because they're not interested in limiting your gambling. They're interested in limiting their own liability. So the minute you raise your hand, they have to step down on you. But other than that, unless you start winning money, have fun.
Yeah, because they, and they have, I know on the apps, they have a thing where you can adjust how much of a deposit you can do each day, but you can adjust.
Oh, they do. They'll love to tell you about, they love to tell you that they have that offering. Don't ask how many people, what percentage of their users use it, but they sure have it.
You can just change it too. I know that from a fact. Like, you can just be like, well, I'm just going to raise it up again,
Right.
And they have self-exclusions where you can do that, which I've done on most of those apps. And some of them offer lifetime ones, other ones don't. They're like a year, 2 years.
Right. Well, now states will offer it too, which is much more impactful. It's well, sort of, except if you like if you have a car, you can just go to a different state. And then so you sort of there's this anecdotal story from someone in Massachusetts who wanted to self-exclude, wanted to cut themselves off from gambling operators, and so got in their car, drove from Massachusetts to Maryland, and in every single state, like drove into the state, signed up for the state self-exclusion list, kept driving to prevent themselves from, basically relapsing, and just driving to a different state where they would, be more likely to bet.
Yeah. The NFL, you know what I thought was interesting too was the discussion you had about Colorado and them legalizing gambling, because I always think there's this whole notion, and by the way, Jonathan has another book about lotteries and stuff. You can see all this stuff on his website. So because it's kind of this the lotteries always come out and they're like, this is for education or whatever, this is where we're going to fund schools. And then so in Colorado, and I'm just kind of, you can explain it better than I can, obviously, but their whole thing was about water, right? About we're
water plan.
We're going to legalize gambling to help with, or maybe you can explain it better than I can. So.
Yeah. Well, it is the same thing. I would say not even for the lottery, which is my last book, but for all sorts of gambling, it's always sort of seen as free money or treated as free money. And it is justified on the basis of a popular program, such that it's like, hey, if you vote down sports gambling on Proposition DD that went before voters in Colorado, if you vote it down, it's because you hate water and you hate water conservation and you hate the environment and you hate our children and their future, not because you actually hate sports betting. And so they've always sort of been some convenient political cause. In some states it's education, as you said. In other states, Colorado in 1982, when they passed a state lottery, it was public parks, sort of a similar, because these gambling companies just know what people in Colorado like, and it's going outside, and they just sort of dangle that little carrot in front of them at all times. And that is what's used to convince voters or convince lawmakers that more gambling is good, because more gambling means more money for some beloved state project.
Yeah, I'm from Florida originally, and I always remember
education.
that when
it was education there in
lottery
1986
was
when they
education.
passed.
They're like, do you want kids to? And I just remember like how much, and they will throw out some stat. They're like, we've raised this much money for.
Okay, do you want to hear? You want to hear about the Florida lottery education scheme?
I love
this
to.
Is not,
Yeah.
This is not a lottery podcast.
That book. I just saw you had that.
Yeah.
Book, yeah.
No, I'll so Florida passed a lottery in the mid 1980s, promising, as you've said, to raise, like, I think it was $100 million a year. That was the goal to raise for education. What happened in Florida ended up actually happening in Illinois and in New York and in California and a couple other states, Virginia, a couple other states as well, is for every dollar that went to education from the lottery fund, $1 of the standard appropriation for education came out. So by 1990, Florida was actually spending less on education than it was in 5 years previously, because all the lottery money was just being, like, basically it was technically going into the education fund, but then it was just paying less into the education fund from the normal appropriation. So it ended up hurting, actually, Florida education spending, which we're now reaping the consequences of that. Thank you very much, Florida, of that, because of, again, this perception that's still with us, that gambling money will solve all of our fiscal problems and we won't have to pay taxes. And that's what got us education. Or education is how we got the lottery in many cases, and in states like Colorado, it's how we got sports betting, and other states it was different causes, even just the last few years.
Yeah, it's I'm from Florida, I'm from Miami, and so you're always gonna have, well, you don't always do, but I still have a soft place in my heart for Florida. But if you took away the oceans, the Gulf, and the Florida Key, like all the stuff that it distracts you from just what a shit show Florida is. Like if you just put Florida in the middle of the country, be like, this state is fucked. And I know it's like a lot of jokes are made about Florida, but I just think it's kind of like that thing. Oh, look at that, there's a dolphin. So let's go.
Well, it's like I mean, yeah. Well, we'll talk about Florida. We'll come back on again to talk about Florida politics. That can be
sure. Yeah. And by the way, if people, just speaking of gambling and lotteries, I think sometimes people don't realize that people can be only doing lotteries or scratcher tickets and be addicts. I think people just kind of lose I mean, I do I'm in a lot of rooms for gambling, and there are definitely people that are addicted to gambling, and all they did was like scratchers, just the scratching tickets, which when I was little, the tickets were like $1 or $2 for scratch it. Now there's $100, like just the thing that's $100 you scratch it off. And if next time you're in a gas station, just pay attention to people in the corner, just going over. It's a problem.
It's crazy, and it's getting worse. If I can sort of bring it back to our conversation about friction, 7 states, including Virginia, which I mentioned, now have online lottery tickets that are basically like slot machines in many respects, like online scratch tickets. And so at least with the lottery, right, back in the day, you used to like have to get cash, drive to the store, and you see people at the counter, and they'll stay at the counter for an hour. Like they'll buy a ticket, they'll win $20, they'll put the $20 back in. But there's still some, and I don't want to say it's solely harmless, because there are people who are addicted. There are people who spend way more money on the lottery than they should, but there's some natural friction to it. And now states are going online lottery tickets, which is just insane and removes that modicum of friction of protection that had sort of existed before. So I don't know how much worse even some of those addictions are going to get once you don't even have to drive to the store.
You just go online and then you just virtually scratch the ticket.
Yes, and some they have like games too, and the whole goal of all this, and this is true of states, including Connecticut, where I live, that has online casino games. So I can play online roulette, online blackjack legally. The goal is like to create someone who's like playing Candy Crush, but to get them to be gambling instead, whether it's on lottery tickets, whether it's slot machines, whether it's blackjack, whatever. And so it's all the same sort of behavioral nudges and little dopamine and flashing lights and colors that you're used to from these sort of mindless games that you play on your phone. They just want you to be doing that with real money instead of, just being served advertising dollars.
And social media is playing into us now too. Now that I've been doing this podcast, my algorithm is a lot of addiction-based stuff coming through there. And I've talked about this before. They're literally gambling influencers. Some people, you believe conspiratorially that they're hired by the casinos. I just think they're people that found a niche where they film themselves playing slots. Millions of views. There's this guy called Vegas Matt. I think Matt. Yeah, Vegas Matt. And he's famous now just from and what's interesting about him is he talks about his losses, and he kind of in a sarcastic way says yeah, you're not going to win. He is saying that, but people still watch it and they're like, yeah, they buy his merch and they're out. It's banana. There's this other guy that you can hire to show you the winning slot machines, which is bananas. I think asks him $3 or $4 just as a flat fee, and then he'll walk you to a machine, not guaranteed of winning, but then he only puts the winners on his social media account. And so that's all feeding into this. I feel like you said, it's you're not gambling through them, but it's all still on your phone where you're seeing that. But also in relation to sports betting how many times have you seen, I'm sure, because you probably, if you're on, I don't know how much you're on social media, but your algorithm probably will feed you the parlay sheets that they always show. Look at this guy.
You could win $100 million.
Yeah. And it's like, sure. How many of those tickets are on the floor? It's like,
right.
So.
No, it's dangling. It's exactly what we were talking about with parlays before, right? Sports betting used to be and was for a long time like bet $100 to win $110 or vice versa, right? That was sort of the bread and butter, was like bet on Oklahoma to win the college football game, and call it a day. And now it's like, okay, try to construct this 52-leg multi parlay so that you can bet $1 to win $100,000, and then when 2 legs come in, show off that you're 1/26th of the way to $100,000. That's just how young people in particular have chosen to bet, is to place these parlays. And it does feed into, as you said, the sort of attention economy and the risk economy. Same thing, just like crypto or stock trading, where people sort of show off their big wins or their big losses just to be sort of dramatic about it. And it has this sort of feedback loop effect of driving more interest in gambling like that, which drives more interest,
And God forbid you win a 15-team parlay, you're screwed. If you're an addict, that's the worst thing that could happen to you. You're like, well, I guess I could do that again.
Just keeps the party going. Just keep the party going. Yeah.
So the NFL fought. They resisted the urge to be associated with gambling for years and years and years.
They fought. You're right. Yeah, they fought. Yeah.
Which I didn't know any of that. That was a really interesting part of your book, was that whole history of, I didn't even know, going back, that the two people, that famous football players that were Horning and Alex Karras.
Yeah.
Wasn't he on Webster? Was that, or who was that? Is
maybe.
that the wrong?
these are like the two of the most famous football players of the 1960s who were each like suspended a year for either gambling or being like associated with gamblers. And this I just bring up, or you brought up, as emblematic of how virulently anti-gambling the NFL was for so long, and how it saw gambling as like the number one threat to the integrity of football and to the integrity of its products, which, lo and behold, anyone who's watching an NFL game will know is a bit of a reversal from the situation today.
By the way, I just looked it up. I don't know how old you are, but Webster, I don't even know if you know what Webster is. It was a sitcom where this white family had adopted a black child, and his name was Webster, and Alex Karras was the dad. It was George Papadopoulos was his name. And that's why when I read that, I go, Webster's dad was suspended a year for
not quite, but you never know. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, Alex Karras. And then so they, through different commissioners, and and for good reason, I think most of it was probably going back to what we talked about with baseball and all the scandals that happened there. They were resisting that because they didn't want people to see the league as corrupt or compromised or whatever, right? And then, like, why did that change eventually? Like,
yeah, no, so you're exactly right. It's sort of about corruption. It served another purpose in the mid 2010s when you may remember the NFL was having a bit of an issue about these concussions you might have heard about, and it was sort of a convenient punching bag at the time. Was like, oh, when someone, I think it was 2012, Roger Goodell was asked about the number one threat to the integrity of football, and he said gambling, because he didn't want to say concussions and he needed something else to sort of pick on.
Yeah, all these gamblings that are causing these players
all
to
this,
kill
all this
themselves.
illegal gambling. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that it's exactly that. It's sort of a foil for the league to use to protect or maintain its own integrity. And then once the Supreme Court decision come down, once it's clear that gambling is going to be legal, the NFL sort of feels like it has no choice. First of all, because it can make billions of dollars a year from gambling, which it now does. But also, it sort of feels like if gambling is going to be legal, then we sort of need to be involved in it in some real way to monitor it and to be involved. And they're actually correct on that front. They do have a bit of a case there. Do they need to be like doing all these little marketing tricks and all this other data agreement stuff that's happening behind the scenes where they're making billions and billions of dollars from gambling and helping to normalize it for sports bettors or for the American public? No, they don't need to be doing that. They don't need to be going that far. But once they went in, they went sort of all in, pun intended, and helped, really played an important role in the, as I just said, sort of normalizing it and making it as normal to watch sports as to bet on sports, or vice versa. And that's thanks to the cooperation of sports leagues.
And it did help, like it did increase their viewership, you think, or did it?
Yeah, so that's sort of one of what was seen as one of the major impetuses for the NFL to embrace gambling so much, was viewership was sort of flatlining or declining around 2017, 2018. And then lo and behold, sports gambling comes around and viewership pumps back up. There's all sorts of possible reasons for that have nothing to do with sports gambling. But this is true actually across the leagues, where it seems like indications are that someone who is betting on a game is more likely to watch if the game has been decided. Like if the Steelers are winning by 40 points, everyone else is going to turn it off, but someone who has, a bet on the over or something is going to keep watching. And not to mention, as you've already alluded to, all the in-game promotions and the advertisements and the commercials and such, all of which, just further line the league's pocket.
Yeah, it is, I think, the number one sport that is associated with or that people like to gamble on. I think I don't know if that's statistically what it is. Probably worldwide, it's still soccer, I would guess, because that's the number one sport. But I don't know.
You're exactly right. I think the NFL actually has not done the most. The NBA has sort of done the most of like to embrace gambling and to integrate gambling into its products. But the NFL, just because of its sheer popularity, like if you look at like the top 50 most viewed events of the last every year, it's always like 48 football games and like one election and then one like American Idol finale or something like that. So it's like it's so dominant that it can't help but be sort of the center of the gambling universe.
Yeah, and I talked about it in this podcast before. You're going to be at a Super Bowl party. I mean, even if you're not in the football, you're going to be at a Super Bowl party probably, or just watching the game. And so last couple of years I've watched with my friends, and they literally have a whiteboard up with all the like they're taking like bets within the house and the why am I forgetting it when you buy the squares?
Parlay cards, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
Super Bowl squares, yeah.
the score and but to me they bet so little that to me as a compulsive gambler I was like, you won $7. I was like, so I feel good knowing that most of my friends that I see do not have,
Right.
it's not an issue for them and they're having fun doing it. And it is interesting for me to watch. I'm like, oh, this is what it's like to just be a normal gambler. So, but
As you know, it is very quite literally like a drug, and your friends who are not addicted to said drug only need small amounts and small hits to get high, and someone who is addicted needs big hits and lots of money sort of on the line to get high. And so I'm not, what your friends are doing sounds totally innocuous and normal, and maybe they would have been doing this before 2018, but you got to wonder, like, would gambling have been as central to their sports viewing experience were it not for sort of the explosion in recent years, or would they just be like actually watching the game like normal people and talking about the halftime show or something?
no, none of them watch the game as normal people because the fantasy football, first of all, doesn't allow that. But I know they're like, well, crap, I need Travis Kelce to get blah blah blah. But if they score again, it's like you're like watching the game as some sort of intricate like puzzle that needs to be solved rather than just
For
like,
you,
wow, that was a
yes.
good game.
Yeah, right. No, and you're totally right. Fantasy sports absolutely ruined that. It ruined the like watch the game to see what's going to happen in the game. It became watch the game to see if your prediction about the game is correct. And so that's why I refer to fantasy as sort of a cultural stepping stone for sports betting. But sports betting now, it's not just like you can show off to your friends and beat them in your fantasy league, but you can like win money. So you can imagine, especially for young people, how how tricky that is, or how irresistible that is to try to do that and to try to leverage their knowledge about sports to win money.
Yeah. Gambling, like as a public health issue, is the theme of, I think, of your book. I mean, isn't that
Yeah.
like that's where we end up? And so I keep saying to people, my friends, like, oh, I think there's going to be like a reckoning at some point, or we're going to start seeing the the results of this in a negative way. Is that already happening? Do you think, or is it?
Yeah, I mean, so there are uh negative results, yes. Reckoning, no. In terms of, we're seeing the negative results, states that legalize online sports betting have a 25 to 30% increase in bankruptcies, rise in auto loan delinquencies, decline in credit scores, rise in credit card delinquencies, reduce investment and savings among low income households. So we're seeing negative consequences, but it is still sufficiently diffuse and sort of spread out. It's not like the opioid crisis where it's like, oh, here's just like a nuclear bomb was like dropped on West Virginia and like the whole place was like wiped out, right? It's spread out. It's lots of different people in lots of different places in their own individual families. Gambling addiction is not something that people sort of know to talk about yet in the way we now talk about drug addiction. And so, meaning the consequences are here, the negative consequences are here and they're being felt, but it's a lot of sort of suffering in silence in many respects. And there's not yet the reckoning that you're describing, which is currently underway in the United Kingdom over what the hell did we just do?
What do you mean in the United Kingdom? What's happening there?
Yeah, so the United Kingdom has had legal gambling legal sports betting, sorry, since the 1960s, legal online sports betting since 2005, and there has been a major campaign over the last few years specifically related to the number of suicides tied to gambling addiction. Gambling addiction, folks might know, is the addiction with the highest correlation to suicide of any behavioral addiction, and so there's been a major public campaign there focus on reforming gambling and adding some of these regulations and some of these guardrails, specifically with the goal of suicide prevention. And the United Kingdom, the government issued a report on suicide about how to reduce suicide rate in the United Kingdom. And one of the 6 like focus areas or pillars of the report is like basically fix gambling. And specifically for young people and young men. So that to me is like the point of a cultural political reckoning that we're not close to having yet here in the US.
Yeah, I don't think we're close to that either yet. But that's interesting to know because I guess it's what is it? It's like cause of death versus the way somebody died. Because I like they, they can say that suicides are, linked up to people that are problem gamblers, compulsive gamblers, but they wouldn't call that the cause of it. Like if you overdosed
Yes.
on opioids, you'd be like, that was the
Right,
like
right.
you
But
were, yeah.
yeah, no, you've anticipated it exactly right. And one of the precipitating sort of suicides, to hate to call it, like to say it was sort of, but the spark in many respects for this backlash was actually the decision by a coroner in the United Kingdom to list gambling addiction as a cause of death
Really?
on this one guy's suicide. I think it was about 10 years ago, and rather than just a, as you said, sort of a tertiary or sort of a secondary sort of behavioral explanation. Like even
Wow.
someone who takes their own life, you wouldn't put like depression as a cause of suicide necessarily, but he in this one case did put gambling addiction, and that helped spark sort of some of this reckoning that we've seen.
That's amazing. I mean, amazing is the wrong word. That's awesome. Like, but
Yeah,
it is progressive because people, addiction has been proven to be a disease. Some people fight again. I see some wellness and influencers and things that are like, no, it's not actually a disease, but I mean, there's enough research and studies that have been done on this, and so that's very progressive to do because that's to say that you could die from this disease, which is a disease, and it is definitely correlated. I mean, I know personally people that took their own lives because of gambling, and so that is yeah, it's not awesome, but I think that's very progressive and a step in the right direction, and because it's the United Kingdom, hopefully that's something we could start following their lead for that. I mean, we are, I don't know. So oftentimes we're allies. We'll see. I don't know if we
yeah,
are
but
anymore.
come on, this is America, and if there's
Yeah,
one thing we're entitled to as Americans, it's not learning from other countries because
sure.
we know better for Americans.
Freedom.
Yeah,
Um,
but just your point. I mean, I think if there is a reckoning, and if there's a sort of a path to a reckoning here, it's either sort of the accumulation of many suicides or many cases of people running into trouble, like what we get in the UK, or it's like a couple of, because this is how America works, like high profile celebrity cases of either individuals or like relatives of individuals that will sort of destigmatize it and bring it out into the open. Because again, we're not going to have like a dope sick phenomena where there's like with Beth Macy's reporting about the opioid crisis, where like an entire county in West Virginia is just like laid to waste by opioid crisis, by addiction, by the disease, where it's not going to have that sort of geographic element. So it has to be like a celebrity or someone who helps it break through. And I'm worried it's like, oh, Chuck Schumer's grandson or whatever is going to like get addicted, and that's how we're finally going to get policy. And I hope it doesn't come to that. I hope it doesn't require some famous politician or celebrity's like nephew or whoever. But I fear, just knowing how the American attention works, that actually is going to be what it's
oh,
going to
you're
take.
saying it would have to be a politician? Yeah, because like
Or
Bruno
yeah, or someone
Mars,
like that.
they came out and Bruno Mars supposedly losing all this money gambling, and I mean, I don't think he does sports gambling. I think it's casino. But then they made a statement. And he says he does do that, this and that, and it is that stigma where if somebody had an alcohol or a drug problem and then they came clean and said, "I'm going to seek help," and this and that, it they're like, well, it's very brave and very forthcoming, or that's for whatever reason, because it's money. I think there's such an ego, especially with men, where it's like, nah, I'm good with my, like, I know what I'm doing. Like, this
Yeah.
whole control issue of it is stigmatized, where I think it'd be tough for, I have a tough time finding people to come on this podcast to talk about gambling. I've had way more alcoholics and people that pills, cocaine, cigarettes. I've talked, if people want to talk about food addiction, that's fine. Gambling is like way harder for me to find people for my
Um,
podcast. But
no, and this, to your point about shame, I think this is, and I'm preaching to the choir here, I assume, but like the fundamental difference mechanically between gambling addiction and a different substance, which is someone who's who's addicted to alcohol isn't going to expect that, like, oh, if I have another shot, I'm going to like be cured of my alcoholism or of my alcohol addiction. But someone who's addicted to gambling can say, oh, if I hit this parlay, I would win $300,000, and that would wipe out all the debt I've accumulated from gambling. So the only way out is through.
yeah,
And that is, again, just fundamentally different about gambling addiction, and makes it, I think, more insidious
yeah.
than other addictions in some ways.
Yeah, there's no plunge of the heroin needle where you're like, this might get me off heroin. Like, then you
Right.
tell
This ought to
yourself
do it.
that. Yeah, you tell yourself, like, by gambling, I can stop gambling, and it's fucking crazy. But that is definitely how your brain works. And then that's why I said if you win these parlays, it's the worst thing that could happen, because I've won huge jackpots and like on in casinos on slots. I've had days where I've had to go down to the gift store to buy a bag to carry out cash that I'd won, playing blackjack or whatever. And sports, the NCAA tournaments. But then you just, like you said, you're gonna lose it, you're gonna chase it, you're gonna keep trying. And I know this story of I think it was I forget which person is. Yeah, maybe it's Andrew or Harry. I know but he's got to win that 50 to 1 parlay, and he's sitting in the driveway. It was the Vikings Seahawks, I think, game or whatever.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I'm telling you, reading, I can't. If anyone is, even if you're not a compulsive gambler, but if you are a gambling addict, I can't recommend this book more, because just reading it was like going to therapy or to like a 12-step meeting or something. It was like, you're like reading the stories. I'm like, oh yeah, I totally. And you mentioned offshore.
Check. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned offshore, these offshore accounts. Man, I remember Costa Rica, I think, had a lot of them. I can't remember what the countries. And that was part of the gambling too. You'd win all this money. You'd lose a lot of money too. But if you did win money, you're like, am I going to get this money? Because it was so shady. The people you were dealing with, it almost felt like it was like scary to deal with, like some of these, because sometimes you get people on the line and be like, well, it is coming, but it's going to take a couple of,
And this is the point about legalization. Some guy like Kyle, who's the guy I profile in the book, he doesn't want to deal with like gangsters in Antigua to like get his money out, right? He just wants to like open up his phone, bet on FanDuel and with his credit card and call it a day. And so this fiction that like, oh, if we legalize it, we're only going to capture all of the illegal gambling that people like Forrest are doing. Like, no, you're not. You're going to get people like Kyle, like 18-year-olds who are not otherwise gambling, and you're going to turn them into gamblers, and you're going to make them addicted and make them want to go to Antigua or wherever, because that's the only place they can get their fix when they have to cut themselves off. So that's, to me, it's like that's like a fun, quirky sort of part of the American history of gambling, was the people who would use crypto to bet in the Caribbean in the 90s and 2000s. But it also sort of fundamentally exposes the fiction and the problems, and the it didn't have to be this way nature of the current gambling setup.
Antigua was the other one. Yeah. I knew you knew. I was like, I was trying to think the other countries.
I'm just hoping someone will like pay me to go down there and investigate, but no such luck yet.
I know, it's those beautiful places where there's just like these seedy operations going on, and that, but also to your point too about people will find a way to gambling. By the way, you need to deposit money in all of these sites before you gamble. And with the illegal underground kind of bookmakers, you don't have to do that. That's still, it's not getting rid of that, because that's just another option. I'm just telling you, as a gambler, when you're out of money, you don't have any money in your wallet or your accounts, you can still call up a bookie that trusts you and be like, hey, I'm going to put a grand on this and a grand on that. And then I don't have the money. And then you got to deal with that whole thing, which I've dealt with those too. That's a whole nother, so it's not getting rid of that at all. But
right. And this is part of that fiction too. Sorry, just to keep hammering the same point, but like there are some people who only want to bet on credit. It's convenient, it's easy, they don't have to pay taxes, whatever. And they're never going to come onto FanDuel. And so the promise that they're going to, that, oh, if we just advertise a little bit more, oh, if you just cut our taxes a little bit more, oh, we'll be able to get all the black market. No, you're not. Forrest is never going to come from the black market into the legal market. He likes his bookie or whatever. So sorry, I just get so frustrated with that that's the logic that is used to justify all sorts of harm. And it just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't hold up to how people actually behave and how the gambling world actually works.
And by the way, I will say, not all bookies are this way, but I had a bookie back in Florida. I'm not going to say his name, of course, but he more than any casino, more than any app, more than anywhere I've ever been, he was the most considerate and about my concern for me. There was times when I would call up and he'd be like, are you sure you want to be putting these in? Like, you're gambling a lot of money. Maybe not that. Like, he would literally do that to me.
You know what? I would love if like someone at FanDuel had a modicum of that concern for their players. But that's great to hear that you found the one nice, gentle bookie in America.
He was, he felt bad for me, legitimately. Like, there was times like when he would have to collect money from me, and he felt bad because, it's not even his money. He's laying it off a lot of the times anyways. but to somebody that's scary. So he's got to get the money, but he'd just be like, hey man, maybe you should take a couple weeks off. He said that to me one time. Maybe you should take a couple weeks off. And I'm like, nah, I'm good. And then that same guy I called up, I remember waking him up one time on Martin Luther King Day. They have early basketball games, and he apparently didn't know, even though he was a bookie. He was like, why are you calling me at 11 a.m.? I'm like, the game started at noon. It's MLK Day. Come on. Like, it's like everyone knows
Yeah.
that. So, um, so how do we, I know you kind of wrap this up. How do we make it like safer for people, I guess, to bet? Is that, yeah.
Yeah, I would love to. There are all sorts of ways. I mean, just talking about the apps, right? Like sort of mechanical things we could do, behavioral changes, get rid of, you know, don't let companies like email you because they know it's your payday. Don't let people deposit, more than 5-10 times or whatever in a single day. Put a waiting period from when they deposit money to when they're allowed to gamble with it. All sorts of things you could change sort of technologically just to slow it down and to add some of that friction that I mentioned before. All sorts of reasons why those things are going to be difficult, but those are what I think are needed. On the flip side, I think is sort of actually not to toot your horn, but like what is needed are conversations like these and the sort of the destigmatization of gambling addiction writ large societally, so that people know to come forward, before they're calling up the nicest bookie in America and relying on him to get cut off, or before, or I think these days parents, or I mean, I have a 3-year-old, so what do I know? But like, I think parents of older kids know to talk to their kids about like porn, about drugs, about sex, about alcohol, and things like that. And I think just it seems like every young person in America is gambling, whether it's sort of on sports betting, whether it's through video game skins, whether it's on something else. And so I think parents, at the very least, need to sort of add this to the roster of difficult conversations that they have with their teenagers and the things that they make their teenagers aware of, because it's sort of like porn. Like a kid finding it on their own is so much more likely to get into trouble than someone who's sort of like primed for it and made aware of it and warned in advance about it. And I think, young men not famously smart, and not famously smart when it comes to money or when it comes to gambling. So I think there's all this cultural clearing work that, again, I wish we had done before legalization, before it rolled out. But now, as you've said, like the way people hear about gambling is from like Jamie Foxx in a tuxedo sitting at a piano. And like, I think we could provide a little bit of counter programming, a little bit of counter narrative to that story, that which is what young people are hearing.
Yeah. Cause I think what you said is, I know someone might be listening and like, well, how are these companies going to do that? Well, sometimes I'm on a phone call and I'll just mention Jamaica, for instance, and then you get off the phone and then you go on Instagram in a little bit and all of a sudden a Jamaica ad pops up. So, and they've admitted to that kind of, so if they can do it that quick, they certainly, these algorithms and the to use AI for something that would be positive, where they can predict. If you go back and you would look at, I'm excluded from FanDuel and DraftKings, all these things. I think those are lifetime ones. And to their credit, by the way, it is very difficult. They do not let you can't just call up and say, I want to come back and gamble again. They won't let you. So that is a good thing. But if you go back and look at my history, there's definitely an issue. Like a computer program could definitely identify, like, this guy might not, we might want to cut him off right now.
Oh, he logged in 25 times in 6 hours. Like, yeah, maybe this guy's got a problem, but no.
Deposit. It's just like, and then we're going to put in like a 16 parlay and then, that kind of crap. It's just absolute madness. And then real quick before we go. So I meant to ask at the beginning, statistically though, I think you mentioned this, it's way more men than women, right? That are, or is it?
that are gambling. Yes. It's, and there's this phenomenon of men like using their wife or mom or sister's like social security number. So I think even the number of women is sort of like artificially inflated. But yes, it is way more men who are gambling. It seems like way more young men specifically who are sort of running into trouble sort of demographically compared to women. Yeah.
I can just tell you from all my years of gambling at casinos, sports bookie, whatever, but especially casinos where you can literally see people gambling, is even women. There's obviously women gambling at casinos. That's not like the women don't gamble, but I will say overwhelmingly, the people that I've seen, what I would say recklessly gamble, is men. just the amounts of the bets, the how they're stacked, that what they're doing versus women. I'm not saying everyone. I've seen women that are out of control too, but
no, the little old lady at the slot machine, right? Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Just like, or I would be gambling at a table. Let's say I was playing blackjack, and I'm sliding in like a stack of chips, and they're like, "Whoa!" They'll make a comment. I'm like, "Yeah, they it's so it's. I think it's a lot of ego driven kind of. I mean, that's a lot of addiction, anyways, is the ego kind of driven. But all right, I didn't mean to end on that, but this was a great talk. The book is called again, "Losing Big: America's Reckless Bet on Sports Gambling." Go to Jonathan's website, jonathandcohen.com, and you can buy the book there. There's a link on there that'll lead you to wherever to buy it. It's really well written, like really easy read. I flew through it, and it was very interesting and well written, and I recommend it for anybody that wants to learn about this, anybody that is a gambler, even if you think you're not a problem gambler, but anyone in general, I think it's very interesting to read. And I'm going to read the lottery one. I can't wait to read that one too. So that's on the website as well.
Yeah.
So
thanks for having me. Really appreciate this conversation. As you said, it's and maybe it is hard to find people with gambling addictions, but I'm glad to be an advocate for this issue and to shine light on the existence of gambling addiction at the very least, right? We got to start somewhere.
All right. That was dope. I enjoyed that. I was not just talking shit to Jonathan there. I did read the book, and I really did enjoy it. And it's a real easy read. It's well written in a way that just kind of glides through, and you're just done with it. So if you are at all interested, go to Jonathan's website. Just click on it, buy the book. I think it's $18. And then write a little review. I got it from the podcast. I don't know about that. Anyways, doesn't matter. I just like people that are nice enough to come onto the podcast to help them. As always, if you're feeling shitty, feeling suicidal, feeling like things can't be turned around, call 988 in US, 988 Canada, United Kingdom, 0800 689 5652. That was interesting about the United Kingdom, so that they put the cause of death as gambling or gambling addict. Australia, lifeline is 131114. Call it. Finland, got a problem in Finland? 0925250111. In Germany, you're fucked. It's 85 digits. You're not going to remember it. Go to the Wikipedia page, list of suicide crisis lines. That has a list of crisis lines by all countries. I think pretty much every country's on there. One day I'll actually look into that. I'll see you guys. Talk to you guys next week. Love you. Bye.